was having some internet issues. Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen. I'm gonna bring up a PowerPoint presentation, which is just easier to run through while I go through the session, so I can refer to some things. If you've got any questions, please feel free. You can pop them in the chat. I do respond to all the questions at some point in time, and between the different sections, you just feel free if you've got any questions regarding any of the sections that were spoken to. I don't mind even if you interrupt me during the session, for questions. If I feel like I'm going to answer a little bit later, that's also fine. So for those who don't know me, my name is Wolff. I'm one of the founders of 32GI. I've got a background of over 25 years in sports nutrition, sports physiology, blood chemistry, and basically my focus is always trying to educate people from a health perspective, trying to create health, not just longevity, because it doesn't matter how long you live, you need to stay healthy for that length of time. And one of the biggest aspects that I focus on is obviously trying to educate people with fueling in and around training. Firstly, from a health perspective, but also from a performance perspective. And I'll get into all of this through this presentation. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen now. If there is, let's check here. Okay. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so the session is really how to approach race fueling. I'm going to obviously talk a little bit more in depth about how you develop a sort of fueling strategy for training and specifically for racing. But before I get into that, I think it's very important to understand how the human body works from sort of an energy perspective so that you actually understand how all these puzzle pieces fall into place. So the first section I'm going to talk about is actually understanding the human fuel tanks. The human body has actually got two primary fuel tanks. The one tank is the glycogen tank, which is sort of I call it our rocket fuel. It's our own natural carbohydrate stores. Glycogen is basically primarily stored in the muscles, and then obviously in the liver as well. And your total energy sort of capability from a glycogen perspective is approximately 2,000 calories. Could be a little bit less, a little bit more, but it's around 2,000 calories, so it does have a limit. And then if you look at the fat fuel tank, you'll notice that you're talking about 40,000 calories. It's pretty unlimited. In actual fact, just to put into sort of from an endurance perspective, you could possibly run 50 consecutive marathons on 40,000 calories of fuel. So in a way, it is an unlimited fuel tank. Where do we access fat from? Intramuscular triglycerides, free fatty or which are fatty acids, which are AFFA is floating around in the blood, as well as subcutaneous fat, which is the fat that sits under the surface of the skin. All of these can be actually broken down and utilized as a source of fuel. And ultimately, whatever the body does, whether it's attached into glycogen or whether it's attached into fat, ultimately that gets put into our mitochondria, utilized as a mechanism to produce adenosine triphosphate, which is ATP, and that is used to power the muscles. And that, in simple terms, it's a little bit more complex than that, but in simple terms, that's how the body actually sort of taps into those energy stores. So these are the two primary energy stores. And I think it's important to understand that because during exercise, we utilize both of those fuel tanks. Some are more predominantly used depending under certain conditions, and we're going to get into that now. So how do you determine which fuel tank is accessed and when? And this is where I bring up fuel tank fueling according to zones. And when I talk about zones, I'm talking about heart rate zones. In other words, a level of intensity, which is a percentage of maximum heart rate. So if I start off, and I'm using 5 zones now, I mean, in some cases, people use 7 zones, some people use 5, A, B, and C. It doesn't matter. I'm just using 5 basic zones now. Zone 1 being 50 to 60% of maximum heart rate, and then so zone 2, 60 to 70, 3, 70 to 80, until we move all the way up to 100% of our maximum heart rate. So zone 1 being obviously the lowest intensity zone, and then zone 5 being the highest intensity zone. So if we just have a look at zone 1, and we have a look at that little yellow ring inside there, which is it's primarily yellow. There's a little bit of white. But you'll notice that when you are sitting in a zone 1 effort, which is 50 to 60% of your maximum heart rate, there is virtually no carbohydrates, no glycogen being burnt at all. Your maximum fuel usage is coming from your fat tank. Fat is the primary use of fuel. Okay. If you're sitting in zone 2, you can see that fat is still the primary fuel tank. Very small amount of glycogen is being chewed up. But where the change comes is as we move into zone 3. In zone 3, you'll notice that a very high percentage, could be 45% in some cases, 50 in others. I've just made it like a 45, sort of 55 split there. But around 45% of that fuel that's utilized is actually sitting there as far as the glycogen goes, and the balance is actually fat. That zone is what I call the glycolytic zone. Glycolytic being that you are chewing up a fair portion of glycogen. In other words, you're burning up your carbohydrate stores once you enter that zone. And then obviously once you go into zone 4 or 5, which are your high intensity zones, this is where you're going to be burning up a high rate of glycogen. I mean, this is where you're really putting down the gas and you're utilizing a high rate of glycogen. Okay, so why is it that intensity determines the fuel tanks that we access? And it's very important to understand this. And this is because oxygen is required. A larger percentage of oxygen is actually required in order to break down fat and utilize it as a source of fuel. There's a very complex process that it goes through, and it takes time, but oxygen has a big requirement. So what happens when you're doing exercise at a very high intensity? You're puffing and panting, you're breathing very heavily, and your oxygen uptake is very limited. So converting fat into fuel when you're performing at a very high intensity is limited. Your body just requires that oxygen automatically in order to be able to go straight down to the muscles. There's no ways there's enough oxygen to be able to convert fat to fuel. But when you're in zone 1 or zone 2, you are much more efficient. And that's why the lower zones are called the aerobic zones. Aerobic being sort of there's ability to utilize oxygen. And then your upper zones are anaerobic without oxygen. In other words, your ability to utilize oxygen is very limited. And that's where aerobic and anaerobic come in. So zone 1 and 2 are definitely your aerobic zone. Zone 3 is what we call upper aerobic, but more glycolytic zone. And I'll speak about glycolytic from a fueling perspective. And then zone 4 and 5 are absolutely your anaerobic zone. There's a crossover point into anaerobic, and each individual, whatever their crossover point is, it's very different based on their fitness level, based on their conditioning, based on certain things like their aerobic efficiency, anaerobic efficiency. How do we test for that? The golden standard for me is lactate threshold testing, running blood test on a ramp test, and actually checking at what that crossover point is when an individual goes into their aerobic threshold. We can see what that crossover point is, what the heart rate is at that particular moment in time. We can then see what the heart rate is sitting at that crossover threshold when there's a certain amount of lactate that's built up, and we call that the lactate threshold. And then obviously then that moves into an aerobic threshold. And these can be tested. Some people utilize VO2 max testing to see what those thresholds are. I think LT testing is probably the best way to go. Okay. So if we sort of speak about glycogen and fat as a source of fuel, high intensity sessions will deplete glycogen at a much more rapid rate. So the more high, the more of a high intensity session you're putting in, obviously the higher the rate of glycogen depletion. And remember, I say glycogen is limited to 2,000 calories. So the harder you're going and the longer you're going harder, so that tank starts to deplete at a much more rapid rate. And that could be, in some cases, 75 to 90 minutes for some people. It depends on the pace that they're running it. And then if you're talking about lower to medium intensity sessions, which are more like your sort of zone 2 areas, there you'd have a much higher rate of fat burn to glycogen. And so your glycogen tank is really not depleting much. The fat tank is being utilized, but it's not depleting because, like I mentioned earlier, fat has got an unlimited storage ability. Okay, somebody once asked me, if I've got 5 or 6% body fat, then wouldn't that impact my ability to have a very high amount of calories to utilize as a source of fat? Absolutely not. Still got a very high fat tank. Okay. So just simply here, if I have a look at the human fuel tank, you'll see that it's just a little infographic that I drew. On the aerobic side, you'll notice that the fat tank is primarily utilized, and as you move up, you'll notice that the fuel tank starts to sort of shift and shape into more of glycogen usage as you move towards anaerobic. But if you have a look at the arrow that I put at the bottom there, I put low carb and high carb. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that from a fueling perspective, you can have no to low carb if you actually gain just on a fat tank. In other words, you've got enough natural fuel to support that level of effort. Do you need to take in sports nutrition? Probably not. It depends on the duration and the intensity. But as you move up, you'll notice that the carb starts to increase and increase. In other words, as the intensity starts to increase with the session, so carbohydrates are required to try and spare the glycogen tank as much as possible and to be able to support that level of effort. So at a very high level of intensity, your glycogen tank is going to deplete at a rapid rate. How do you slow down that depletion rate? You introduce carbohydrates so that your body can actually take those sugars which are broken down, and obviously that gets distributed as in the form of blood glucose straight to your energy cells, which are utilized to produce adenosine triphosphate. And obviously, if your body's taking glucose from ingesting an exogenous source of fuel, which is from carbohydrates primarily, you can slow down the rate of glycogen depletion because it's going to utilize that glucose as opposed to your natural carbohydrate stores. And in that case, you can actually extend the period of time that your glycogen tank is going to last you. So earlier I mentioned, if glycogen is going to last you about 90 minutes, let's say, and you go and ingest a large amount of carbohydrates regularly to try and utilize those exogenous forms of carbs, which are ultimately broken down into sugars in the blood, then you will slow down the rate of glycogen depletion. And that means that you can extend it from 90 minutes maybe to 2.5 hours, even maybe up to 3 hours. You could probably extend it at least 30% at the very least. So that will allow you to perform a lot harder for a lot longer. Okay. If I have a step back now, if I go a step back to these fuel tanks and I have a look at them again, what I've done now is now I've incorporated fueling based on the different zones. And this is a method that I developed quite a few years ago because I'm of the opinion from a health perspective and from a performance perspective that you should only fuel the effort, number one. You should try and tap into your natural fuel stores as much as possible. No one wants to overload on sports nutrition. I mean, I basically am a shareholder in a company that sells sports nutrition, and I'm telling you that you can buy less. And people say to me, why do you advocate that? And whatever I say is actually in the best interest of an athlete's health. I'm not one for just pushing product when I feel it's not needed. And that's what I'm going to teach you, how to decide when and if to take based on certain sessions. So if I look at zone 1, which is a pure fat burn zone, okay, basically for a session up to 2 hours, you can actually see that I've said you can actually go on water. You do not need any kind of carbohydrates. If it's hot, you can take a hydration or mineral solution. I mean, we've got like 32 GI hydrate as an example. So you could take something to maximize your hydration levels and increase that fluid uptake. But you don't need calories. You really don't. You can actually, in a fat burn zone, burn the fat. Why would you want to stop burning fat? Because when you ingest carbohydrates, all you're going to do is load your body with blood sugar, and you're not really going to be utilizing it much anyway. So I would say that in that case, you should actually go faster. If you look at, and zone 1 is a recovery zone, by the way. If you go greater than 2 hours, I've said low carb. Why low carb? Why am I introducing carbohydrates here? The reason being is that 2 hours or greater than 2 hours is a long period of time to be without any calorie ingestion. I mean, you could have burnt off at that level. You could have burnt off between 500 and 700 calories, let's say. The question is how is that going to impact you from a calorie deficit for the rest of the day? Is it going to impact you? Is it going to create fatigue? Are you going to train again later? Sometimes you need to take something during a session to aid, which is the second reason for taking fuel during a session, to aid the recovery process. So if it's going to be an extended period of time without taking any calories, then I would say maybe it's worth taking something low carb to help stabilize blood sugar and just to allow that recovery process to happen a lot quicker. Also, if you go greater than 2 hours in zone 1, chances are you're going to hit something which we call cardiac drift. So it's very difficult to maintain a flatline heart rate through an exercise session because as the core body temperature starts to heat up, you need to divert more blood to the surface of the skin. And the reason we do that is to sweat. And sweating is our natural cooling mechanism. It's the natural way that the body cools its engine. And so when that actually happens and there starts to be a lot of fluid loss, so the heart starts to work a little bit harder. And sometimes you think you're in zone 1, but you drift into zone 2. And once you drift into zone 2, it's very possible you're burning off now a little bit more glycogen in zone 2. You might not have intended to go into zone 2. And the same can happen if you're in zone 2 and you drift into zone 3. So that's why with exercise sessions that are greater than 2 hours, sometimes you do need to look at consuming something because you might move into a higher burn rate. In zone 2, I've actually put there as well, less than 2 hours, you can also go on water. In zone 2, if you're really going less than 2 hours, you can absolutely go on water. And if you are going for greater than 2 hours, I would say you can also then go low carb. Sorry, let me go back there. Once you move to zone 3, this is where you've really got to decide on how you're going to feel. I mean, if it's like a 40 or 45-minute session, even less than an hour, I mean, you could go on water. You're not going to really burn off much and you can recover afterwards. But if you're going to go like closer to 2 hours, 90 minutes to 2 hours, I'd say then you should definitely take low carb. Once you're going greater than 2 hours, definitely, depending if it's maybe 2 hours and 5 or 10 minutes, you can still go low carb. But if you're going up to 3 hours, I would say now carbohydrate intake needs to increase. And then if you're looking at zone 4, you'll see less than 2 hours low carb. So even carbohydrates, why? You really do deplete a large amount of glycogen. So you do want to start helping replenish or save that glycogen, especially because if you keep on hammering the glycogen stores, eventually it can lead to a glycogen depletion phase, which can onset fatigue quite severely. And I've seen that even in stage racing, where an athlete races brilliantly on day 1. On day 2, they're still pretty good. Day 3, they start to get to day 4, they crash because they haven't actually fueled properly during the session. They haven't recovered post-session. And so it's a domino effect. And then when it comes to zone 5, also the greater than 2 hours, zone 4, high carb. Obviously, you're not going to go zone 4 for many, many hours. You can't hold that effort that long. It's just not possible. So it could be an interval session. It could be kind of a split session. It could be tempo, whatever it is. Well, not tempo. Tempo would be lower than zone 4, but it could be above LT, and you could really actually be pushing sort of longer intervals over a period of time, and that can be over a long period of time. And that's how you would land up with a workout that's greater than 2 hours. And then if you're looking at zone 5, carbohydrates are pure glycogen burn zone nearly, and I mean there you can't go greater than 2 hours. It will definitely be less than 2 hours, but only glycogen. Okay, so how do I know what zone I'm in? I mentioned earlier you can do proper testing. There is a manual way of doing a lactate threshold test. You can see what your maximum pace is or your maximum power is for a 60-minute period. In cycling, we call that functional threshold power. In running, we actually we call that also we call that also your threshold, your lactate threshold. And you would go for 60 minutes, whether it's a run or you would max out for 60 minutes with a bike. A lot of people don't like a 60-minute test, so they do these 20 or 30-minute FTP tests, and then you take a percentage of that to work out what your power is for 60 minutes. Then you know what that zone is. Is that 100% accurate? Not really. I think bloods don't lie, but for those people that don't have access to this kind of advanced testing, then I mean it's probably as accurate as you'll get, and you can test it a few times to see what the level is. I think you need to baseline it and test it over a period of time, and that will give you a good idea. But from a heart rate perspective, I can tell you this: if you're in zone one, you can have a conversation. You can exercise with somebody, you can have a full-on conversation. In zone two, you can also have a conversation. Your sentence structure might be limited to like less words, so you might be able to speak 8 or 9 or 10 words and then have a breath, or 7 or 9 words and then have a breath and breathing in between. That's probably zone two. It's conversational, but still requires some oxygen intake. In zone three, you're very limited. You might be able to say like 3 to 5 words and then you've got to breathe. 3 to 5 words and breathe. Okay. In zone four, 1 word. It's not usually a pleasant word, especially if somebody's in zone four and you're trying to talk to them. Zone five, there's no speaking. So that's how you can sort of gauge from a layman's perspective which kind of zone you're in from a heart rate perspective. And the reason that happens is because oxygen uptake is limited, so you can sort of gauge, am I getting a lot of oxygen in? If you're having a conversation, absolutely you are. If you can't have a conversation, then you're hitting your glycogen stores. Absolutely hitting your glycogen stores. Okay. Are there any questions on that? Okay.
Oh.
Yes. Okay, so this slide basically is basically a slide which I mean, this is where it boils down to the crux of the matter is you need to fuel for effort. Carbohydrates equals better performance and recovery. So if you're doing a functional threshold power test, let's say you're doing an FTP test, if you have got a coach and he said to you, we're going to do a test every 6 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever it is, a lot of people get very nervous before a test and their heart rate's pretty up before it even starts. I just generally tell people not to stress, just go and do it. Or even just do it if you weren't planning on doing it and you feel like doing it, do it. But the one thing that's for certain, if you do a functional threshold power test fasted, okay, you might, let's say you push out 4 watts a kilo. Sorry, I just see there's something in the chat here. Okay, I'll answer that now. If you do an FTP test and you do it fasted, let's say you've got this idea in your mind that you want to push out. I'm just saying, like, you want to push out 3.8, 3.9 watts a kilogram. Let's just say that's your ability, and you can hold that power for 30 minutes. Let's say in that test, let's call it a 30-minute test. You can hold that power for 30 minutes. If you fuel for that session, if you take carbohydrates, you take a meal before that session, and you fuel during that session. Okay, let's say you do a 20 or 30-minute warm up before, and you start to fuel. And then just before you start that session, you fuel, and then you fuel during the session. I can guarantee you that you won't hit your 3.8 watts per kilo. You'll probably hit 4.1, 4.2 watts per kilo. And the reason I say that is because consuming carbohydrates will improve your ability to perform. It's amazing how it does that. And I've seen that without fail every single time that I've seen athletes do testing. When you get the fueling right, you get better power numbers. You get way better power numbers. The same with a track athlete or a runner. You get better pace numbers. It's unbelievable. And if you're taking caffeine along with that, it can lower the rate of perceived effort. We call it lowering RPE. You can also improve your power numbers. So take carbs and caffeine, and even better, as long as you can tolerate caffeine. I'll talk about that a little bit later. So somebody said to me, well, what does it benefit me if I can push harder? Like, let's say I generally ride at maximum efforts for VO2 or whatever the intervals are that you're doing, whether 2 or 3 minute efforts. Let's say you're pushing out massive power and you're pushing out maybe 5 watts a kilo or 6 watts a kilo, or whatever it is. If you can push higher, if you're pushing out 5 and you can push to 5.2 or 5.3, you can take that rev counter just a little bit higher. You will do more muscle damage. If you do more muscle damage, when your body recovers, it resynthesizes your muscle protein and your body repairs itself. You will adapt at a much higher rate than an athlete that's just holding themselves back because they're not fueling at that level. And that's the difference that proper nutrition and fueling can make to an athlete that wants to really progress. So you can have two the exact same level athletes, they're going along this track over here, and the one athlete is going and he's just not progressing. The other one is actually fueling properly and he's actually going there. And before you know it, there's big difference between the two's ability to perform. And that can be as little as 8 to 12 weeks. A lot of the scientific testing that's been done, I've got quite a few research studies on double-blinded testing over a 6 to 8 week period with elite cyclists, and it's quite interesting to see that those in a mixed carbohydrate diet or those that are introducing carbohydrates compared to those in a ketogenic diet, they adapt and they perform at a much higher rate than those that are on low carb diet. And I'll talk about low carb and high carb, etc. later. I'm not knocking them both. They both got their benefits and their places. But fueling for effort makes a big difference. The other thing is if you do a very hard session, okay, let's say you do a FTP test. I mean, if I did one, I know it would be at least a 30-minute warm-up. I'd probably then smash out another hard effort for however long, let's say 30 minutes, and then I'm going to cool down. Let's say it's an hour, 75 minutes or 90-minute session. I'm probably going to burn off maybe 11, 12, 1,300 calories. But there's no ways I can go and have a 1,300 calorie meal immediately afterwards. It's just crazy. And I've probably done it in the morning. So my calorie deficit's already big. Could be sitting at like 1,800 by the time I finish that session. So if I fuel during the session, it's not only going to aid my performance, it's going to reduce my calorie deficit. It's going to allow me to have a smaller or a decent recovery meal afterwards, and I'll be able to manage my energy levels and fatigue levels for the rest of the day. So from a recovery perspective, fueling during a session can definitely aid that recovery process as well. Okay. Remember, the human body's got natural fuel for many hours of exercise. If you're going to do performance fueling, utilize rocket fuel for it. If you're going to do aerobic or recovery sessions, utilize your fat fuel for it. Don't need to take it. So that's how you periodize your carbohydrate intake. You decide on the session and you decide how to fuel the session. Everybody looks at their training sessions for the next day and they're like, I'm going to go on a 3-hour ride. I'm going to do VO2 max. I'm going to do hill repeats. But they don't actually think or conceptualize how they're going to fuel for that particular session. It's really important to understand, like, how are you going to approach your nutrition strategy for that training session to make that session count to its maximum. If you don't nail that session, then what's the point of doing it? So you've got a goal, hit that goal. Okay, sorry, I'm going to answer some questions now. Okay, so if you train for two, so the one question is, if you train and it's over 2 hours, what is low carb like? How do I know what is low carb? I am going to get to it. I've got a nice slide to explain that. With regards to zone 4 and 5, okay, so this is getting more product specific. I will talk about that when we get, so don't worry, I've got a slide which will talk about that a bit later. Okay. And that's where we get into the practical fueling strategy. So the first question I'm going to actually answer over here. Carbohydrate intake during exercise. So this slide actually comes from Asker Jurkendrup. He's a sports scientist. His focus has been sports nutrition for decades. He was once the CTO or technical advisor to some of the biggest sports nutrition brands in the world. But he runs, he's a professor, he runs a university study group. I actually attend quite a few of his lectures. And this chart actually comes from my sports science. I actually need to have it credited. Don't know why the designer hasn't, but I will have it done. But it's just it's not 100% accurate, but it's a breakdown of how you should approach your carbohydrates. So you can see 30 to 60 minutes, he's got there what's called a mouth rinse. So that was a study that was done quite a long time ago. It took two groups of elite, I think they were triathletes. They made, I think it was a 60-minute test. They made the one group drink carbohydrates. They made the other group not drink carbohydrates. The group that took the carbohydrates finished a certain percentage faster than the group that didn't. Carbohydrates equate to better performance. Then the next time they did the test, they made the one group take the carbohydrates, and then they made the other group also take the carbohydrates with a difference. They made them put the carbohydrates in their mouth, swirl it around, and spit it out. They were not allowed to swallow. Both groups finished at a high rate of performance. So what does that mean? The minute the carbohydrate hits the palate, there's a signal to the brain. And that neurological response already triggers an improvement in performance. How long will it last? Not very long, because then eventually the body's going to realize that it was expecting something and it didn't come. And then that's when your energy system starts to go down. But it did help with the performance improvement. So that's just something that I thought would be interesting to let you know. But once you start going like 60 minutes to 2 hours, this is sort of low carb. So looking there at 30 grams of carbohydrates per hour, sports nutrition guidelines talk about 30 to 60 grams of carbs per hour being a standard. So 30 grams to me is on the low end. That's a low carb. Once you start moving to 60 grams, I'd say that's like nominal. And then once you start going up now, carbohydrate intake these days is up to 90 grams or higher. In actual fact, I work with athletes that are up to 120, 130 grams of carbohydrates per hour. Personally, and I weigh 66 kilos, my carbohydrate intake is 115 grams per hour. I'm working towards 120. So is it possible? Yes, it's possible, and I explained to you how. But it's very important to understand. So low carb, I would say no to low carb is around 0 to 30 grams of carbs per hour. And then once you go above 30 towards 60, I would say that's sort of more medium to nominal carb intake. And then your higher carb intake will start to go over 60, up to 90 grams of carbs or higher per hour. And you can see from the time scale there, like 2 hours or over, the recommendation is to start moving like 2.5 to 3 hours to around 60 grams of carbs per hour, and then up to even 90 grams of carbs per hour. Now, if I look at an individual and one guy weighs 110 kilos and the other person weighs 50 kilos, it's a little bit different from a digestive system perspective. And I think everybody's got certain levels of tolerance. I like to try and look at a gram of carbohydrates per kilogram of body weight. To me, that's like nominal. That's like a nominal amount. If you can hit that gram of carb per kilogram of body weight, then that's great. But that's, as you're getting heavier, it's possible you want to try and even match that as well. It's not, of course, it doesn't matter how much carbohydrates you take in. It's about how well your digestive system is receptive to that carbohydrates and how it breaks it down. And I need to talk about that now. So if you have a look in the top of this chart over here, see it says single or multiple transporter carbohydrate. So what is a single transportable carbohydrate? A single transportable carbohydrate is something that we call a monosaccharide or a disaccharide. Okay, a monosaccharide is something like if I have a look at it, it's like glucose or fructose. They're single molecule carbohydrate sources. Okay, sorry, a multiple is the disaccharide. Di meaning two molecules. So there you could have two monosaccharides attached together, and that would form a disaccharide. And that's already two different sources of carbohydrate. So a single source carb, like I mentioned, glucose or fructose, the body's fructose channel is capable of probably processing and breaking down around 30 grams of carbohydrates per hour. So if you're relying on fructose as a carbohydrate source and you're taking in 30 grams of carbs per hour, will the body utilize 30 grams of carbs per hour in the form of fructose? And fructose meaning fruit sugar. So take a date, for example. Let's say you take a date and it's got 30 grams of fructose in that date. You probably need a 50 gram, 40 gram date to get that. Sure, you can use natural food. But if you want to get to 60 grams of carbohydrates per hour, and now you've got that date, which is got a high amount of fructose in, and you think you can just take 100 grams of date now, it's not going to work, because your body can still only process 30 grams of fructose per hour. So if you're eating something that's got 50 or 60 grams of fructose in it, and you're eating that within an hour, you are going to impact your digestive system negatively. And what's going to happen is that you are going to land up with gastrointestinal distress. You can't override the limitations of the body. Okay, let's have another look at a single source carbohydrate, which I mentioned was glucose. Glucose it's got a different channel that it utilizes for absorption in the body, and that's what we call the glucose channel. And that channel is capable of 60 grams of carbohydrates per hour. So if you just ingest glucose, pure glucose, you could take in 60 grams of carbohydrates per hour. But if you want to go to 70 or 80 grams and you're using pure glucose, you're going to cause gastrointestinal distress because the 70 or 80 grams of glucose is higher than what the body can process on an hourly rate. So how do you get to 90 grams of carbs per hour? If you took 30 grams of fructose and you took 60 grams of glucose and you join them together in a mix, you would be able to get 90 grams because you're maximizing the fructose channel and you're maximizing the glucose channel. You're taking advantage of both of them. And that's how you get to 90 grams. So there was a stage where research was done on a 2-to-1 glucose to fructose ratio. And so that would be double the amount of glucose to fructose and putting that into a solution. A lot of us utilize that formula to try and make it as easy as possible in the digestive system. But with changes in sports nutrition and where science is headed, there's a lot of other ways of doing that at the moment. Okay, what is table sugar? So some people, they utilize products which have got sucrose. So sucrose is a 1-to-1 glucose to fructose. So what does that mean? It means I can get to 60 grams an hour because it's a 1-to-1. So if I take 60 grams of sugar and I put it into water and I drink it, I'll get 30 grams of fructose in there and I get 30 grams of glucose, and that will give me my 60 grams. But if I take 70 or 80 grams of sugar and I put it in there, I've got a problem because now I've got 35 or 40 grams of fructose, which has got a 30-gram limit. The glucose will be absorbed, but the fructose will not, and it can cause gastrointestinal distress. So this is what we call multiple transporter carbohydrates. In other words, taking different kinds of carbohydrates and making sure that they're blended together to provide the best possible rate of absorption and to obviously give you the opportunity to maximize your exogenous carbohydrate intake. And that's how we get to very high rates of carbohydrate intake. We utilize different carbohydrates that utilize different channels. They get absorbed at different areas of the gut, some more upper bowel, some lower bowel. And by creating these specific blends, we're able to maximize that pull through and place a lot of ease in the digestive system, but also allow for a higher carbohydrate intake. Okay, so it's very important to understand that if you are battling with stomach issues or you're feeling a bit of discomfort during exercise, you've got to go back and ask yourself, what is the blend of carbohydrates I'm utilizing? Are you mixing multiple products together? Because when you do that, you don't understand. A specific product is designed for a specific absorption rate, and now you go take two products together. One's got high fructose, the other one's got high fructose, or the one's got high glucose, the other one's got high glucose, and you blend them together, and suddenly now you've like just over extended yourself as far as those channels go, and you put stress on the digestive system. So it's very important to understand that when a product's developed, it's developed for a specific use, specific functionality, and if you go and create a bit of a mix on your own concoction, you can upset the balance and you can cause havoc. It's not going to give you the energy that you desire, and you also run the risk of causing gastrointestinal distress. And I often get people telling me, man, I took this product and I landed up in the toilet afterwards, and that was terrible. And I'm like, okay, what did you do? And then they tell me, no, I had this one tub of Endure, I had this 2 servings of the Endure, and then I had the nougat bar, and then you have a look at it and you go, well, of course you landed up in the toilet because like you ingested like maybe 100 grams of fructose like in a very short space of time, and that's going to cause havoc with the digestive system. So it was mixing the products together and not understanding how the actual blend works. Okay. So how do you take this information and develop a feeding strategy that allows you to understand how many carbohydrates you can tolerate per hour, which kinds of carbohydrates you tolerate per hour, and how can you build it up over a period of time? And so I developed this approach to sports nutrition, which is called the tipping point method. And it's a start low, build up higher sort of method. So let's say you're not sure how many carbs you take per hour. If you're not sure, then, I mean, if you are taking some form of carbohydrate, you can go and check what the packaging says and work out how much you're consuming on an hourly basis. But if you're not sure, then what you do is start on the low end. So let's say you start with 30 grams of carbs per hour, which is on the low end. You pick a particular carbohydrate source and you take it. You make sure that you take it that amount every hour, 30 grams now. How do you take fuel over an hourly period? You break it down into 30-minute feeds. That's optimal. 20 to 40 minutes is like the earliest to the latest. 30 minutes is optimal. So you take 15 grams at 30 minutes, 15 grams in an hour, and you keep clock feeding like that all the time. You finish your session. Don't make it a very low intensity session. It needs to be like a fairly intense session because you want to monitor your energy levels. You want to test your stomach. You want to see that it sustains whatever you've taken. And you finish the session and you're like, great. I felt okay. My digestive system was good. I felt comfort. But now I felt like I could have done with a little bit more energy. So the next time you jump to maybe 40 grams and you do the same thing, 20 grams, 30 minutes, 20 grams, 60 minutes, 20 grams, 90 minutes, pick the carbohydrate, you build up, you test it, you're like, wow, okay, great, 40 grams worked for me. Next time, maybe you jump to 50 grams and you keep going each week until you build up. And then let's say one day you're hitting like 65 grams and you felt great, but the week afterwards you hit 70 grams. You take in the 70 grams, so you're splitting it between maybe 35 grams every half an hour, and you suddenly feel some issues with your digestive system. You're feeling a bit bloated, a bit crampy. That's the tipping point. That's the point of where you need to now cut off and you go back to where you last felt comfortable. So you jump from 70 back to your 65 or 60. You test it over and over again. And then what you do is you basically test it. You train the gut. We call it training the gut. And once you've trained the gut, you can try and go back to 75 again. When you go back to 70 or 75, whatever that last one was where you felt uncomfortable, you test it. And if it works, great. You've banked to the next level. And you can try and test it there for a while and then eventually jump to the next level. But if you did jump there and suddenly you felt gastrointestinal discomfort, it's possible that the blend of carbohydrates that you're utilizing does not support that kind of absorption rate because it's too high. You've maximized those channels, and that carbohydrate blend is not conducive to supporting the digestive system from a processing and absorption point of view. And this method needs to be utilized. And just based on what I'm saying now, you can actually see this isn't a quick fix. This is why sports nutrition needs to be practiced over and over and over again so that you understand exactly how your body works. You've tried it, you've tested it, and then you need to take it to race day and then utilize what's been working during training. And this is why I suggest to people that these processes can take 10 weeks, 12 weeks, 15 weeks, even longer to really perfect them. It took me 12 months to get to 115 grams of carbs per hour. And I also had to change products and utilize specific products to get there. So it really depends on what the body's capable of, but it also depends on the kind of product you're utilizing to support that level of carbohydrate intake so that you are feeling comfortable. Okay. Any questions on that? Sorry, I just saw there's one in the chat. Okay, so somebody said they like the fact that I pointed out multiple carbs. Look, everybody's body's very different. We're all human beings, but our genetics are very different from one to the next. And I come from a family that suffers from IBS, Crohn's disease, irritable bowel, diverticulitis, proctitis, you name it. And so a family with a history of sensitive digestive issues, I mean, falling into the category of like even some people with IBS that have got celiac disease, you have to be very careful as to what kind of carbohydrates you're going to take in as a source of fuel. First of all, if you're celiac, you need to avoid gluten completely, but you really do need to understand what will work for you and what won't. And very often, you could be taking a glucose fructose gel, which is supposed to be easy on the digestive system because it's the way it's structured is multiple transporter carbs and it's hitting you. But then I'll meet somebody and it's like it doesn't work for them at all. It kills their stomach. So we've got to find another means of a carbohydrate that maybe is going to be broken up in the upper bowel a lot quicker. It's going to be pulled through a lot quicker as opposed to being broken down in the lower intestinal tract. Like fructose takes a lot longer to break down, where glucose takes a lot quicker. But then you get dextrins, which are pulled through quite quickly, and you can get like which are basically potato starch extracts or cornstarch extracts, but those are sort of rapid releasing carbohydrates when they do break down. And just as an example, I mentioned carbohydrates are broken into sort of three categories. I think it's important to mention. You get monosaccharides. I said it's a single molecule, and a single molecule being fructose, or I don't know how those hearts appeared there. Fairly, my fingers like fructose. But it is a single molecule like fructose or glucose. A disaccharide I mentioned, a simple example is like table sugar. It's glucose, fructose, 1-to-1 bound together. So that's two molecules. And then you get something called a polysaccharide. A polysaccharide, it's very interesting. A polysaccharide is a complex carbohydrate. You hear this term complex carbs. It doesn't mean a complex carb is better than a simple carb, because a complex carb is still going to get ultimately broken down into blood glucose. The difference is like if I look at a dextrin, think about a piece of string, and on each side of the piece of string, you've got all these little monosaccharides attached, all these single molecules attached to it, maybe 18 or 20. When that string gets broken down in the digestive system, it floods the body with all those monosaccharides. And so that gets very rapidly converted into blood glucose, and then obviously it's taken up. So it does provide a large amount of carbohydrates. And then you get a cyclic dextrin, which we utilize in one of our processes, which is a cyclic. So it's not a straight piece of string. It's a circular kind of a structure with the monosaccharides attached right around it. And because of its shape, it exits the gut. It's got a very high speed. It exits the gut rapidly. It provides energy immediately. So it does not put stress on the digestive system. So taking something like that and combining it with certain kinds of carbs can obviously maximize the uptake as well. So it's important to understand that if you look at a label of a product and it says a label of a product according to label legislation, like sort of food regulation labeling law, it will tell you total carbs, of which are, and then you'll see things like sugar. So how much of those carbohydrates is sugar? So if it says 50 grams of carbohydrates, of which 30 grams of sugar, then you know that 30 grams of that total carb is fructose or glucose, or just glucose or just fructose, because those are classified as sugars. The other 20 grams is not classified as a sugar because a polysaccharide, which is a dextrin, is not classified as a sugar. So on the outside, it's not classified as a sugar, but when it hits your body, believe me, it elevates blood sugar. So when you buy a yogurt and it says sugar-free, have a look at it. It says cornstarch. And if it has cornstarch, believe me, that is a hidden sugar without you knowing. So a lot of people look at a product and they go, oh, look, it's sugar-free. That's how the industry pulls the wool over your eyes. So just teaching you how to read labels a little bit, so you understand sometimes the devil you know, then the devil you don't. And if you are using anything with sugar in for exercise, there's no harm done. Your body will never have a sugar spike. You will take that glucose up like this because the muscles will need it. Okay. Can you get over your body's carbohydrate level with recovery drinks? I'm not 100% sure what that means. I mean, the only way to test your carbohydrate tolerance levels are really during exercise when the digestive system is under stress. And if I understand what you're saying, maybe this could be the direction that I'm thinking is that does your daily diet play a role in your ability to tolerate carbohydrates? And the answer is yes, it does. So as a simple example, I think it's very important to speak about. I've got this little sort of analogy, this little comparison I do. So you've heard this term, train low, race high. Okay, when it comes to sports nutrition, it's the biggest mistake you could ever make. Imagine going low carb, low carb, low carb, low carb. And then suddenly on race day, you go high carb and then you die because your body doesn't know what to do with it. It's like your body's been speaking one language and now it's like speaking another language. So let me give you a simple story. A teacher goes into a classroom and says, I'm going to teach you all how to speak Spanish, English speakers. So they sit there and the teacher starts like introducing them to pronouns. So like if you've ever studied a language, like I've studied other languages, you start with pronouns, he, she, I, them, they, we, whatever. And then you can start to attach verbs to that. And then from there, you can also start to attach verbs and then adjectives. And then eventually you start to develop a little bit more complex sentence structures. And over time, you'll get better and better at building these sentence structures and making them more complex until you start to become a little bit fluent. And over time, you become more and more fluent in that language. But it's a process. And then one day, the teacher comes into this classroom where all their students now speaking English and Spanish, and she just starts to speak to them in German, and it goes straight over their heads. So what actually happened? They had absolutely no idea what language she was speaking, and she had to start that process from the beginning. She had to start the process of teaching the pronouns, and then the adjective, and then the verbs, and then slowly a bit more lengthy sentence structures and complex sentence structures. And finally, after like maybe 6 or 10 months, wow, these guys are starting to speak a bit of German now. And now they can speak German and Spanish. Okay, now they're bilingual. Fat fueling and carbohydrate fueling are two languages. It's the German and the Spanish. If you lead a low carb, higher fat diet, and you're used to doing faster training, or you're used to fueling more on a fat-based kind of fuel or whatever it is, and suddenly you go and ingest carbohydrates, your body is not going to know what to do with it because your whole body has adapted to processing fuel sources which are coming from a diet that you've been utilizing for a very long time. And so your entire cellular structure, your microbiome, your the way your mitochondria produce ATP efficiently is from the way you've trained them to do that. And suddenly it works the same way. If you eat a high carb diet and then you want to go and do a faster training session, how's your body going to feel? Your body's going to go like, oh man, I'm feeling like terrible. Because suddenly you're like, I'm going to do a faster training session, but I've never done a faster training session. So all of a sudden your body's like, how do I speak fat? How do I speak fat? It's not something that just happens overnight. It's a process. So the best athletes in the world, the best athletes in the world, they speak both languages fluently. Their bodies are very efficient at utilizing fat at very high levels of intensity, and their bodies are extremely efficient at oxidizing carbohydrates. They train both languages, both systems, they train constantly. Okay, so like I said before, there's days where you don't have to fuel, and there's days where you should fuel. And by doing this over a period of time and periodizing your carbohydrate intake according to duration and intensity of exercise, you will learn both languages. You'll train the body to speak both languages. And that's really how you'll adapt. Okay, so somebody's just asked me about consuming a gel every 30 to 40 minutes relevant to training. So now we're going to get into the business now. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in detail. Okay. So let's have a look at how we feel based on how many calories, which is basically goes back to how many grams of carbohydrates we're taking per hour. So I've got here a multi-hour system of drip fueling. So this is what I call a fuel dispenser. This little block here. What is a fuel dispenser? A fuel dispenser could be a bottle with an energy drink. It could be a pouch with a concentrate in. It could be a gel. It could be chews. It could be a bar. It could be whatever. That is the way you're dispensing your kind of fuel, your energy. Is it a liquid feed? Is it a solid feed? Is it a combination? That depends on what your preference is. It depends on what you like. Some people hate gels. Some people hate chews. Some people prefer liquid feed. Some people prefer solid feed. It really depends on what your preference is from a taste and texture point of view. Okay. 30 grams of carbs per hour is basically 120 calories per hour. So you can actually see I've just broken it down into hours. And then if you look at 2 hours, it's 60 grams. You'll see that what you would take, 30 grams, obviously it's halved because you're going to take what you would take in hour 1 and 2, you're now taking in 1 hour. And then if you're looking at 90 grams of carbs per hour, what you were taking in an hour, now you're actually taking it every 40 minutes to get 240 calories every 40 minutes. So that's really how you look at whatever you're dispensing. You've got to decide how you're going to break it down from an hourly perspective. And like I said, 20 to 40-minute feeds, about 30 minutes preferred. Okay. How does this equate to product? And this is the next slide is going to actually be very interesting for you because now I'm going to give you a real life scenario of how this equates to product. And the way it equates to product is if I look at 30, 60, and 90 grams in the 32 GR product range, for example, if I look at 30 grams, it's 1 race pro energy bar every 50 minutes, 30 grams. Oh, sorry about that. It is a race pro gel, less than half of a gel in an hour. Okay, because a gel is 300 calories. A snap gel, 1 every 45 minutes. Okay, if I go to 60 grams, suddenly look at that. Race pro energy bar, now I've got to take a whole bar every 25 minutes. A race pro gel, half every 38 minutes. A snap gel, I've got to take 1 every 22 minutes to get 60 grams in. And then so on. A whole tube bar every 30 minutes to get in 60 grams of carbs an hour. Well, it could be slightly less because a bar is actually 33 grams. So it'll give you 66. So close to a full bar. If it's in a drink, 1 scoop every 22 minutes. So basically a bottle every 44 minutes if I'm going at 60 grams. And then chewable tablets, I mean, to me, they're very small. Runners like to use them, but it should be used only for a very low feed. If you're going to 60 grams, it's not a very good feed. And then the other drinks. Now look here, I've got crosses over here on the 90-gram chart. Why are they X's? Because the snap gels do not get to 90 grams of carbs an hour. With that blend, and I'm just being honest about this, I can tell you that it's going to be very difficult to get 90 grams of carbs per an hour with that gel. Firstly, you'd have to consume that a gel. If you were taking those gels, you'd need to consume a gel every 12.5 minutes because it's only got 21, 22 calories, 22 grams of carbs. So that's the limitation. But the actual combination of carbohydrates inside will limit you. You might be able to get to 70, but I don't think you're going to get to 90. Okay, race pro gel, absolutely. Race pro gel is what I utilize to get to 115, 120 grams. Most of the athletes are utilized. That's designed specifically to go for a high intake. Can you use it for a lower intake? Yeah, sure. You just use less. But if it works on high, it's definitely going to work on lower. Race pro energy bar, I've done the same. It's easy to take in 90 grams per an hour, and it's quite easy to take in a bar every 17 minutes, assuming you can chew. And then the drinks, the only drinks that support 90 grams or higher are the race pro drink and the race drink. I would say that if you're going at a much higher intensity and you're going for long, a liquid feed anyway is way better because you need to keep your airways open. So why would you want to sit and chew if you're puffing and panting? You're blocking your airways. You're not allowing maximum oxygen uptake, and you actually can limit yourself and fatigue yourself. You try to maximize oxygen uptake. The best way to do it is to actually have a liquid feed. So in the form of a gel. The race pro gels are not thick. They're actually liquid gels. They've got like 46, 48% water in them. They're very, very high with water, and so they're very fluid and very easy to consume. Whereas like a snap gel is very thick and you would need to consume water with it. So all of these things need to be taken into account when looking at sports nutrition. So a lot of sports nutrition brands, I'm not knocking brands, there's some good brands out there, but they won't tell you, is there a limitation to how much carbs you should be taking in per an hour based on the formulation that we're utilizing for that particular product. I think a lot of brands don't do the testing, they don't understand. And I've seen some brands where they'll say, just take a gel every 40 minutes. And I'm like, okay, well, take a gel every 40 or 45 minutes, but that's not going to give me my 60 grams or 90 grams of carbs an hour. So if I had to take your gel every 45 minutes, how am I going to get in my 60 grams of carbs per hour? Where am I going to get it from? Like, what is the assumption? Where sports nutrition is moving in advancements today is which athlete can take the most amount of carbohydrates per an hour without causing gastrointestinal distress. Does that equate to better performance? Absolutely. Can you see times dropping through the world? It's not just performance and fitness. Sports nutrition is playing a massive role in supporting those levels of efforts. I mean, recently we saw Kipchoge at Berlin Marathon. The guy's weight, his weight is in his 50s, is in the 50 kilos. And he was consuming 90 grams of carbs per hour, which equates to, I mean, he was pretty much close to 2 grams of carbohydrates per hour. That's huge. That's huge. I mean, if you times your weight by 2, you can work it out. I mentioned earlier, I weigh 66. I'm moving towards 120. I'm moving towards that too. I'm probably on 1.7 or 1.8 at the moment, but I'm moving towards that mark. And so what do I feel when I'm taking in so many carbohydrates? If I'm feeling comfort, if I'm feeling a very good level of digestive comfort, what am I actually feeling during exercise? I feel that I've got so much energy, I need to push harder for longer. Somebody said to me, what's the downside? I said, the downside is I finished my session too early. I should have carried on going because that's how much energy I actually had. You feel like you want to push harder and you've got the ability to push harder. So it does make a massive difference. Okay. Somebody asked me in Cramper Salt on this chart. Why haven't I put Cramper Salt here? Because Cramper Salt is not an energy gel. It's a hydration gel. It does not provide energy. The amount of carbohydrates in there is so limited that to get in 30 grams of carbs per hour, I'd need to have a Cramper Salt every 15 minutes. So is Cramper Salt an energy gel? No. Is it a hydration gel? Yes. And we're going to get to hydration. Okay. So just let me have a sip here. Right, let's talk about energy versus hydration. A lot of people rely on energy drinks in the bottles, especially cyclists. We've got bottle cages, we put our bottles in, and we rely on an energy drink for energy. What is the problem with that? Well, the problem with relying on an energy drink in a bottle is if I fill my bottle, let's say I use my race drink. I know it's got 69 grams, so call it 70 grams of carbohydrate in it. Okay? If I want to take in 90 grams of carbs per hour, and I've got this, let's say it's a 750 ml bottle with 70 grams of carbs. It means I need to finish half that bottle within the hour, at least, okay? And add in another energy source from the outside. So that could be in the form of a gel or a bar, maybe 2 bars of 2 gels, to be sure, okay? That would allow me to get closer to 90 grams per hour. So it's not just the energy drink because that's very limited in how much it's providing. But so the energy drink's providing me fluid, yes, and it's providing me energy. But is the measurement of what I'm taking in accurate? Not really, because I need to know how much I'm drinking of that drink. So let's say I plan on finishing a whole bottle in an hour because I want to maximize. I want 70 grams of carbs out of that bottle every hour. Great. I get to race day. The race day is miserable. It's raining, it's pouring, it's cold, or it's just very cold. I didn't plan on the weather. The weather just happened. I can't drink that whole bottle in an hour. It's cold. I'm not losing that much fluid in the form of sweat. My heart rate's lower because there's more, the temperatures are colder. I'm not moving. I'm not heating up. My core body temperature is staying lower. So I can only drink like half that bottle in an hour. And I was planning on drinking the whole bottle per hour. What does that mean? It means that now all of a sudden my energy's dropped to 35 grams per hour, where I wanted 70. So what am I going to do? Where am I going to get my energy from? So it's very important to separate your hydration and your energy. They're 2 separate things. I always measure my energy. When I'm cycling, I actually use, I don't know if you can see it. I had these made. This is a 300 ml squeeze pouch with a bike belt. So what I do is I bomb 3 or 4 gels into this squeeze pack of Race Pro, stick it in my pocket at the back, and I know I've got measurements on the actual pouch, how much I need to consume every hour, and I'll drink from that thing every 15, like on 20 minutes or 15 minutes, I'll drink from that, and then other 15 minutes, I'll have a water or hydration bottle in my bottle holders. That's my energy, and inside my bottle cages is my hydration, and that's how I feed. This doesn't have to be gels. I could have just gels sitting in my pocket, or I could have chews sitting in my pocket, or I could have a top tube bag with chews or gels or something sitting there. But my bottles are hydration, and my external source is energy. I keep them separate because I need to make sure that that amount is measured. That's a target. You need to hit that target on an hourly basis, and you really need to hit it properly. Okay. When we talk about hydration, we need to understand that hydration is based on temperature and individual needs, and I'll get a little bit more into that. The most important thing is that you don't create these soup mixes. If you stick to a product, trust the product, try it and test it in training. Don't make a soup mix. Don't overdo it. Okay. Hydration requirements. What is hydration? Hydration is replenishing around 80% of lost fluid. So if you're going to lose, let's say you're going to lose 600 or 700 milliliters of, or let's call it a liter of fluid during an exercise session. Then if you wanted to replenish 80% of it, it means you should have actually probably taken in about 800 milliliters during that session. So let's say you lost that liter over 2 hours, and that means you should have been consuming about 400 milliliters of water over an hourly period. Okay, just to try and reduce or replenish that amount of fluid that's been lost. How do you know how much fluid you've lost during an exercise session? A very easy way. Weigh yourself before and then weigh yourself afterwards. That weight differential will tell you how much you've lost in the form of fluid. Okay. The weight lost during exercise is fluid loss. So if you weighed 60 kilos before your exercise session, and then you weighed 58 afterwards, you lost 2 kilos, you lost 2 liters. You went on a bike ride for 4 hours, so that's basically 500 milliliters per an hour. 80% of that, looking at about 400 milliliters or so per an hour intake. Okay. If you did consume like maybe a liter of fluid during that exercise session, and then you weighed 58 kilos afterwards, then you actually lost 3 kilos, not 2. Because you took in a liter, you lost 2 kilograms, so your actual total weight loss was 3 liters. And that will give you an idea of how much you've lost. I diarize this because the thing is that every day is a different day. Some days could be more humid, hotter, temperature changes, etc. And so the thing is that it's, as opposed to going for a sweat test, which is in a very controlled environment, training it does not happen in a controlled environment. It can be windy, it can be not windy, it can be very hot, it can be dry, it can be rainy. Whatever it is, you will get to know your body's fluid loss by just recording it over a period of time, and it works very, very well. I've been doing it for years. It's pretty accurate. And that will give you an idea. Okay. Just by the way, I mentioned duration, your core body temperature heats up. So obviously the longer you go, the more fluid you're going to lose, because obviously temperature changes, especially if it's a morning session. And if it's an indoor session, you're going to lose even more because there is no cooling factor. So even indoor sessions can get quite hot as well, unless you've got a fan. And then the weight of an individual. The greater the surface area of a person, the more fluid you're going to lose as well. This just happens. The bigger the person is, the more fluid he's going to lose. Okay. Can you consume 100% of fluid loss? No. That's what can lead to hyponatremia. The body is only capable of absorbing so much fluid on an hourly basis. And if you overload it, you can dilute your sodium levels. And the last thing you want to do is that, because that can lead to swelling of the brain and it can cause havoc. It's a very difficult situation to come back from. You can always rehydrate, but you can't get rid of overhydrating. The only way to do that is to actually increase your salt intake significantly. Once had an athlete I worked with, a good triathlete, after an event, completely nauseous and basically starting to throw up. They thought she was dehydrated. I asked her, the medic came running with a drip, and I said, wait, don't put on the drip yet. I asked her how much fluid. She said to me, Mark, I took so much fluid in during this race. I said to her, well, tell me. Because she said it was very hot. And I said, well, tell me, what did you take? And once she had told me what she had taken, I said to the medic, don't give her that. I went to where they were making hot dogs. I took all the salt sachets. I made a salt concentrate in a glass. I gave it, I said, drink the salt. She started to drink the salt. It's disgusting because it's terrible to just drink salt, but she started to drink the salt. A very, very high, what we call hypertonic solution, loaded with sodium, less fluid. And after about 45 minutes to 60 minutes, she actually started to feel a lot better. And the reason I've actually felt she was overhydrated, she already started to suffer from a headache. Unfortunately, sometimes dehydration and overhydration can have very similar symptoms. So it can lead to a bit of an unknown area. So how does the human body work from an absorption point of view? Water in the stomach is like a blocked drain. It drops like this, like call it every 20 minutes. It might drop a little bit. You could be absorbing 160, 180 milliliters over a 20-minute period. But if you add salt and a little bit of sugar to that solution, but primarily sodium, you can actually extend that drain. It's like adding a little bit of drain block to the area, and it will maximize the fluid pull. And so it's always good to have a hypertonic solution. I don't believe in drinking water on its own because its absorption rate is limited. I like to add a mineral to it, especially in the form of sodium. And so I never drink ever water on its own when I'm training. I always remember when you excrete sweat, which is water, you're actually losing minerals as well. You want to try and maintain a sodium fluid balance or sodium water balance in the body, and that's really what works the best. Something else that I'll talk about a little bit later is hyperhydration. Okay, just fueling with protein. Just want to mention, can protein be used as a source of fuel? That's the third fuel tank. Is it an efficient fuel tank? No. The body can process like maybe 12 grams of protein hourly. Okay, so if you go to eat 20 grams of protein in an hour, is it going to break it down and utilize source of fuel? No, the body's not. But what is the advantage of utilizing protein as a fuel source? It can mitigate the effects of the onset of gluconeogenesis. Gluconeogenesis is a process that takes place where the body utilizes other sources of fuel substrate. So we're utilizing glycogen, we're utilizing fat, and now the body says, hey, I'm going to take protein and I'm going to break that down into glucose and utilize as well, because the brain controls everything and there wants to be balance within the body. So while glycogen is going down and fat's going down over a longer period of time, the body's like, okay, let's use protein as well. Let's try and create a bit of a balance. So by ingesting protein, you can feel a bit fuller, a bit longer. It can be utilized as a fuel source. It can mitigate the onset of muscle fatigue, which can be brought on by catabolization of your own muscle protein. Okay, so I do suggest in stage racing it's utilized, absolutely. But I actually utilize it whenever I'm training, and the reason I use a protein source in my fuel is because if I am going on long sessions, on our daily diets as athletes, we need to take in a certain amount of protein a day. If you go out for a long ride on the weekends, you've lost a large amount of hours of where you could have had a protein window. And that protein window, I don't like to miss. So I ingest protein during my exercise session to help achieve my total protein target for the day. Yes, it's a smaller amount, but it adds to that target. So I might end up with 20 grams of protein intake over a 3-hour period, but it's 20 grams less that I'd have to consume because the human body is only capable of breaking down, like I said, around maybe 9 to 12 grams of protein per an hour. So if you're going to go and try and make it up by eating 50 or 60 grams of protein after a training session, you're not going to be able to break it down and process. Most of that protein probably converted to blood glucose. Yes, it can be taken up by the muscles because you've been doing some form of exercise, but is it going to be utilized to resynthesize muscle protein? I believe in periodizing protein intake to maximize the uptake. So I love taking protein during long training sessions. Okay. Oh, somebody asked me where we found these pouches. Oh, so I mean, look, Sportsman's Warehouse sell soft squeeze pouches. I've just ordered 3,000 from China. We had them manufactured. They're coming in the next couple of weeks, 2 weeks, I think. So if you drop us a mail and you're interested, I've made some nice ones that actually are see-through. They've got measures. You can dispense a gel in there, and you can actually see exactly how much you can take them now. They actually work very well. So I've designed them specifically for my purpose. I've been testing the soft pouch sort of concentrate gels for a long time. Somebody's asked me what protein do I take on the run. I use the Race Pro gels on my long rides or the Race Pro bars. They've got protein in. It's a carbohydrate and a protein blend. Small amount of protein, it's nominal, with a large amount of carbohydrates. Okay, so let's talk about as you get closer to race day, what should you be focusing on? Okay, firstly, keep it clean. And when I say keep it clean, I mean don't go and eat foods that you wouldn't normally eat in your daily diet. Try and keep the diet as whole food and as clean as possible. You don't want to land up with the risk of getting any gastrointestinal illness or any kind of illness, etc. You want to try and keep your immune system up. A lot of people get sick before race days because they've just been training hard, and then suddenly their immune system's been suppressed. And I see it through bloods all the time. Athletes are pushing hard, and they come to me, and I run bloods on them, and I'm like, okay, well, you've got neutropenia, you've got low red cell count, you've got low hemoglobin, your hematocrit levels are a little bit low, your creatine kinase levels are elevated. That just shows me that you've been training so hard, you're not really recovering. So how do you recover? You need to eat properly and rest properly. Alcohol, not conducive to recovery, and it also dehydrates you. And a gram of glycogen is bound to 3 grams of water. So if you consume alcohol and you're dehydrated, you can't even top up your glycogen store. So save alcohol for after the race. Don't overeat. You don't want to end up gaining weight leading into a race. A lot of athletes, they overeat getting into a race, and then they say to me, "Oh, I was only 1.5 kilograms heavy on race day." 1.5 kilograms heavy on race day is quite a bit. If you're a runner, it's a huge amount because it's a high impact sport. But even as a cyclist, I mean, if you're pedaling at a cadence of 80 and you're carrying an extra 1.5 kgs and you're turning those pedals, think about it. If you're turning the pedals, I don't know, let's say you've got a cadence of like 80 on each side. So 80 times 1.5 kgs, 120 kilos of extra force that's required so, per minute, and times it by an hour, it's 120 times whatever. So, go up a hill, it's even a lot more force. So it does make a difference. You want to try and maintain a stable weight, the same weight that you were training on to the weight on race day, or if you could race day a little bit lighter. So as your volume drops of training heading towards race day, depending on how long you taper for a cycling event, I would say that you should just that last week before maintain an energy balance and try and maintain a nice sort of level of eating. Don't overdo it. Make sure you hydrate daily. Hydration is definitely one of those things that athletes land up getting wrong, and it does lead to fatigue. So how much should you be drinking on a daily basis? Generally, we talk about 30 to 40 milliliters of water per a kilogram of body weight. Okay, when I say water, I mean fluid, because in actual fact, green tea and coffee and all of these things, they are forms of fluid. They don't really dehydrate you, as been shown with research. So whatever you're taking in the form of fluid, you need to go to about, I would say about 40 milliliters per kilo body weight. And if you're exercising, you increase it on top of it. And then focus on sleep. The more you sleep, the better you recover. The more you sleep, the better you can perform. Very important. The 3 days leading into the event, 24 to 72 hours before, I always say keep it clean. Don't now go and do something that's going to upset your stomach. Reduce fiber intake. So some people get pre-race nerves. They get a bit of gas, a bit of discomfort, a bit of stitches, feels like a bit of cramps, whatever. Fiber can cause digestive discomfort. I would say just reduce your fiber intake because fiber can be insoluble, and it's like eating plastic in a way. It goes through the digestive system. It doesn't provide you energy. So I would say just lower the intake, and up to the day before, like reduce it completely, and focus on maximizing your energy food. Avoid foods that you're intolerant to. So if you're lactose intolerant, don't go eat dairy. If you celiac, don't eat gluten. Try and avoid foods that are going to impact you negatively. Again, no alcohol. People hate me because I put no alcohol on every slide. Not that I'm anti-alcohol. Well, I am, but I mean in moderation, I believe, and I definitely not before a race and not afterwards for recovery. Alcohol-free beer is good. Slightly up your carbohydrate intake in the leading into the event. It does make a difference if you're going at a much higher intensity. If you can just top up the glycogen stores a little bit more, upping your carbohydrate intake slightly, not too much. You don't want to gain weight. You want to gain glycogen weight. And then hydrate, so mineral loading. So what I do and what I suggest to people is what we call hyperhydration. So some people just fatigue because they got excessive fluid loss. How do you lower your excessive fluid? So you can get one athlete and he dehydrates like this, and then suddenly cramping sets in and he's feeling terrible. And then you get another athlete and he's just tapering very slowly. How do you taper slowly? You maximize your hydration levels prior to the event. So what you do is you hyperhydrate, you increase your mineral intake. So what I suggest is taking in a hydration tablet, dropping a hydrate into a bottle of water, drinking it 2 to 3 bottles a day, 2 to 3 days before the event. That's hyperhydration. You maximize your ability to retain water so that on the day, you're not going to dehydrate at a much higher rate. Your fluid storage is going to be really significant. And so when you're losing it, you're not going to dehydrate too quickly. And so we top it up. It works very, very well. Been a lot of research done in this area. I've tested it myself, and I tested it on lots of athletes from all levels, amateur up to elite. Makes a big difference. They love it. People absolutely say it felt so good. And then focus on sleep again. Okay, the day before, sleep in later. There's no need to wake up early in the morning. Like if the race is on a Sunday and you're sleeping, the Friday night's the best night to maximize your sleep because the night before a race, a lot of people have pre-race nerves and they can't go to sleep and they're tossing and they're turning. So I would say sleep in late on the Saturday and maximize your sleep. Definitely no alcohol the day before. Don't overeat. Hydrate. Again, mineral loading, half hydration. And then lunchtime, you can increase your carb intake. Dinner, everybody eats these massive pasta meals the night before. There's no need to. All you're doing is impacting your sleep. So I would say have a slightly bigger lunchtime meal and have a very small dinner. Somebody said to me once, what do you eat for dinner the night before race? I'm like, I don't know. Could have scrambled eggs on a piece of toast. I mean, that's how small it can be. It doesn't have to be a big meal. I don't go mad because I want to go to bed feeling comfortable and I want to fall asleep quite easily. And if I've overeaten at dinner, I'm going to land up with a bloated stomach. I'm going to toss and turn. If I'm overhydrated, I'm going to run backwards and forwards to the toilet, and I'm going to lie in bed the whole night, tossing and turning, and then like my eyes fall asleep at 2, and I've got to like wake up at 3:30 or whatever it is to go race, and it's not a nice feeling to have. So I would just say keep that meal small because the most important meal is your pre-race meal. The meal you have the morning of the race is the one that's actually going to set you up for a brilliant, brilliant day out. So that pre-race meal should be consumed at least, I would say, 2.5 hours before. Can even be had longer before. The size of the meal or the volume of the meal would be determined by how long before. I mean, let's say it's 2 hours before. You could probably have around a 400-calorie meal. High in carbohydrates, low in fat, low in protein, nominal amount of protein, low in fat, very low or no fiber. So that's really what makes a good pre-race meal. Examples of that, not brown toast or high fiber toast or brown bread. You could have white bread. On the white bread, you could have, I don't know, peanut butter and honey and banana, just as an example. Do eating eggs play a role in helping you with an energy system? No, it takes a long time to break down. It's not going to be harnessed as a source of energy quickly. Carbohydrates is like the quickest source of energy. So I'm not a fan of eating high protein, high fat diets before a race, especially if you're going to be performing in a high level of intensity. You need access to rocket fuel, not to diesel engine fuel. And other examples could be like oats with a bit of peanut butter, a bit of banana, a bit of honey, cinnamon, whatever you can eat. I used to make actually overcooked white rice pudding. So I used to overcook white rice, used to mix honey and peanut butter and a tiny bit of protein powder in and mix it up, soak it overnight again after it was cooked. And then the next morning, if I wanted it hot, I'd add some hot water, mix it and eat it. If I wanted it cold, I could add I don't drink milk. I'm lactose intolerant. So a bit of oats milk, whatever I could add in, drink it, or a bit of water, drink it. Could have it hot or cold. And then that's why I launched the pre-race meal because that is pre-cooked white rice flour with a little bit of protein in, low fiber. And for me, that's what I eat now. So I just mix that I mix like a whole serving with some banana or berries, teaspoon of peanut butter. Sometimes I add a bit of honey to increase the carb intake. I love it. I mix it either hot makes it lumpy and cold makes it smooth. So that's what I use. Pre-race hydration. I don't like to overload my bladder before a race. I find if I drink too much before a race, my bladder's overloaded and I keep going to the toilet. Some people can handle more fluid. So instead of having like a whole bottle of hydrate, I generally take a hydrate tablet and I actually drop it in a glass, like maybe 200 mils, and I drink that. I love my coffee before a race. I sit with a French press or before pre-training, and I like to make a really strong, like Americano. Does caffeine play a benefit in performance? Yes. But usually it's a measured amount. And so the problem with caffeine is like you really want to measure the amount of caffeine. It's recommended to take around 3 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, or 1 to 3. I would say 3 is better. That means that I need to consume about 200 milligrams of caffeine prior to the race for it to really sort of free up free fatty acids and make a difference from a perspective of going out. So, I mean, do I have my coffee? Yes, but I can't go and have like 4 or 5 cups of coffee. So, maybe I have 2 or 1.5 cups of coffee. But then what I do is I just take some G shots. So I'll just bomb some caffeine shots, which is 60 milligrams of caffeine. It's measured amount. So I'll take like 2 or 3, and then I know that that will work for me. Caffeine during a race is also has a benefit, but during a race, caffeine or during a training session, caffeine has peak concentration levels of 60 minutes. So caffeine it rises 60 minutes peak concentration levels, and then it starts to go down. What does that mean? It means that it can make you feel good, but at 60 minutes, you could start to hit a bit of a downer. And so when you feel that downer, you want to make sure that like you at the finish line. So if you start taking caffeine in the race, it needs to be like before 60 minutes, you need to keep taking the caffeine. So you need to keep, as it peaks there, you take in the next shot to try and build and to build so you don't have that downer. So remember, if you do take caffeine, you've got to keep topping up with caffeine. Don't stop. I take a caffeine shot every 30 minutes when I'm racing. I run in 120 milligrams of caffeine an hour, and that works very well for me. So, but it's tried and tested during training, and I find that works. So you really do have to test it. If you're a big coffee drinker, sometimes you need more caffeine, or sometimes you need to like sort of tone down the caffeine a little bit before the race, so that on race day the caffeine has a bigger benefit. Some people they drink so much coffee, but you don't really know how much caffeine is in coffee. Unfortunately, the strength of the coffee is not how much caffeine it's in there. Caffeine is actually taste or flavorless. It's just it's the strength of the bean. So that's why I prefer measured amounts. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Okay, so just to summarize, never arrive at a race without a planned nutrition strategy. I think it's important to plan. I've given you some really good tips here how to plan. You need to practice during training, and then you need to take it to race day and you need to bank it. Always test your nutrition during training. That's really the time you've got to test it. Make notes. Make notes. I'm telling you, diarize it. I work with a lot of people with nutrition, and it's quite interesting. They tell me I eat healthy. I'm like, okay, let's see how healthy you eat. And they send me their foods. I plug it into a nice little app, and I analyze the eating. And I'm like, okay, you eat healthy, but you overeat health, which is why you're gaining weight. You're in a severe calorie surplus. And the reason they think that they are gaining weight is because they've got a medical condition, because they are eating healthy and it's not working, is because they're eating too much health. So sometimes when you actually start to diarize something, it's black and white. You see it for what it is. So always diarize something. It will always keep you in check. I like to make notes of everything. Start low and build high. Digestive comfort to energy balance required. Okay. So I spoke about the tipping point chart. Build up, try and see what your maximum levels are. Take notice of what you're consuming during training in the form of liquids and solids under various weather conditions. Diarize that as well. Take note of the energy levels. If you finish a training session strong, that's a sign that you're getting your nutrition right. So yes, your legs can be tired. Your muscles could be tired or fatigued. But if your energy, you can feel the difference between legs and energy system. Your energy system, you can actually feel when it's stable, and you can feel when you've got the ability, even if your legs are tired, if you've got the ability to push at the end of a session and finish strong, you know that your energy system has supported that. Once you're satisfied, test out. I always test out sort of race simulation to test my nutrition. If I'm doing a half Ironman, I might go on a 2.5 hour time trial or 90K time trial on the bike. I'll hammer it out at race pace, and I will test my nutrition and make sure. And that will be could be 10, 12 weeks before the race. I will make sure that bike leg is done, that I know that nutrition works for me. And I won't do it once. I might do it 3 times because I'm a little bit OCD. I want to make sure that I've nailed it and done it properly. I know some of you are doing cycle challenge. I'm not saying you're going to be perfect for cycle challenge from a nutrition point of view. I think I've given you an ability to understand what your possibilities are. but there's plenty of races every single year, and this gives you the ability to start to build up for all future races and really start to really hone in on that nutrition strategy and get it right. Okay. I'm going to go through some questions now. Before I do, I want to just mention. So somebody said, won't half hydration increase water retention, the body increase weight on race day? It can increase it, but not significantly. There's no ways you can hold like kilograms of water, of excess water. But it can provide you that 30 to 60-minute cushion. You are going to get rid of that. Remember, you're going to get rid of that water. You're going to sweat it out, that's for sure. You are going to sweat it out. And it's not going to be sitting in your stomach. It's going to be sitting in the cells. Okay, so I think that's important to understand. So where I spoke about gaining weight before, I'm talking about weight that you can't get rid of during your weights. Water weight you can easily get rid of. So yes, it will increase a little bit of water retention, but I can guarantee you that it's not going to play if you compare the way it's going to age your performance to how it's going to impact you from a sort of weight perspective, it will be negligible because you're going to sweat it out. Probably in the first hour, most of that water will be gone. Be back to race weight quite quickly. What about adding real food in race training as it's easier to consume supplements and real food? Look, I'm a fan of real food. I'm just a fan of convenience. So like if I'm going on a 3 or 4 hour ride, I'm not going to go fuel on bananas, especially it's impossible for me to take 90 grams of carbs in the form of bananas. First of all, it's not convenient. It gets hot and mushy, and to deal with bananas is for me crazy. If I'm going on an aerobic session and I feel like I need low carb, maybe I'll eat a banana before I go and then just go like fasted, as an example. But you've got to understand that sports nutrition is a convenience. It's an easy to carry mechanism, an easy to use mechanism, and a mechanism that's conducive to providing a specific composition that's going to allow for maximum absorption. So whole foods in and around training, absolutely. I don't believe in quick fixes, and I believe that your diet should be completely natural. I do rely though on I've got a very high protein intake. I mean, I'm 52 years old. At this age, we have to deal with sarcopenia, which is muscle degradation over time. So I do strength training 4 or 5 times a week. My protein intake is a lot higher than it was when I was in my 30s or 40s. I consume 2.5 grams of protein per kilo body weight minimum. So I've got to eat 180 grams of protein on a daily basis, 170 to 180. Sometimes I even go up to 200. In chicken breast terms, you're talking about 6 to 7 chicken breasts of protein a day. I do not eat that amount of protein in chicken breasts or eggs or egg whites because that would be like 60 eggs or so. So I utilize protein powder. I utilize our protein powder. It's a plant-based protein. It's a very good protein. It's easy on my stomach. It works well for me. And I might have 2 servings of that to complement and to utilize that towards my sort of standard whole food diet. But I mean, I consider those proteins to be whole foods because it's pea protein and rice protein. So for me, that is a form of natural food extract. But I do use a supplement to help achieve those targets. So in some cases, I believe sports nutrition plays a vital role from a convenience and sort of helping a person achieve a certain target. But at the same time, it shouldn't replace natural foods. You should rely on natural foods as your primary intake from a health perspective. The recording will be made available tomorrow. Absolutely. And I think it'll be emailed out. So something I didn't tell you. Along with the recording that's going to be sent out, I have created a brochure. It's like a fueling guide of everything that we spoke about, detailing how you approach sports nutrition, how you manage your tipping point of intake. I've also put suggested fueling strategies for like a sub 3 hour cyclist that cycle challenge, or a weekend warrior, for example, a liquid feed, a combination feed, or both, So it might give you an idea of how you could break down your feed using these charts. And I'm hoping that will provide some value for you. And then I think Dave said he's also going to send out a discount voucher. So if anybody wants to buy at a discounted rate online, I think he's going to send out a discount coupon as well. So So that's all going to be sent out. It will all be sent out, I think, tomorrow. Yeah, so somebody said the 100-kilometer race recently with Race Pro in the bottle, finished with good energy levels, but legs stayed behind at 70. The question is how much Race Pro is in the bottle? Because over 100 Ks, I can tell you that I would take 4 bottles of Race Pro. I would take 16 scoops of Race Pro. That's how much I take. So your legs might have needed a little bit more, but at the same time, you would have to look at the training and understand what your endurance foundation was before you did that 100K race. How many 100K rides or 120K rides aerobic have you done like every single week for months and months on end before you did a race like that? So most aerobic rides are so important, especially from an endurance point of view. They obviously help with mitochondrial population, increasing growth of mitochondrial population, capillary growth, um, circulatory system efficiencies, vasodilation efficiencies. All of these do help when you're training a lot with aerobic. Does fatigue the day after a long session indicate the loss of glycogen dehydration? So the fatigue the day after a long session could also be that your calorie intake was too low and that your deficit was too high. So what happens is it's like a domino effect. It spills over to the next day. If you're feeling hungry the day afterwards, like if you're feeling fatigued, but you're feeling like you've got this hunger, that generally means that the day of your long training, you didn't take enough calories to support yourself. You know, it's very important to understand on days where, like, we've got something called a rest metabolic rate, which is the amount of calories we burn at rest when we're not exercising. Mine's around 1,680 calories. So on a day where I'm doing nothing, I'll eat close to 1,680 or 1,680 calories. But let's say I train and I burn off 1,000 calories. Now my calorie intake should be closer to 2,680 calories. So I can eat more. On weekends, my calorie burn rate could be 3,500 calories. So I mean, now I can bring it up and I can try and eat like 3,000, 3,200 calories if I want to be in a very mild deficit. 3,200 calories is a lot of food. I mean, it's a fortune. It's a fortune. So that's why fueling during the session properly, pre-training, during training, post-exercise, and then small meals throughout the day to try and achieve that target is quite important. I know for some people it's hard, but it's very important to manage your calorie intake during training and in and around that training because it's going to make a difference from a fatigue point of view. Dehydration absolutely can lead to fatigue as well. But with dehydration, you'll find that you're feeling thirsty and that you might develop a headache. You might develop a bit of a throb in the head, especially if it's quite dehydrated. I do drink, depending on the heat, I drink hydrate straight after the session. Oh, there is another session I'm going to be doing in a couple of weeks, which is actually a little bit more advanced on the sports nutrition side, but just a little bit of tips here. From a recovery perspective, there's four things you've got to look at from a recovery perspective post-exercise. The first is rehydration. Rehydration is number one. The first thing you do after any exercise session is you need to replenish fluid that's been lost. Why? You cannot replenish glycogen if you've got too little fluid in the body if you're dehydrated. Because remember what I said earlier, 1 gram of glycogen is bound to 3 grams of water. So if you're dehydrated, how are you going to replenish glycogen stores? Number two, muscle protein synthesis. You do need fluid for muscle protein synthesis. So if you want your muscles to recover, you also need fluid. So that's why alcohol stays out the picture. It sort of downregulates, it prevents that from happening. So rehydration, number one. What's number two? Number two, carbohydrate intake. Why? You want to try and stabilize your blood sugar. You want to try and help replenish glycogen stores. Okay. And then number three, protein. You want to resynthesize muscle protein. The only way to do that is to consume protein. So those are the three primary elements of recovery from an energy system perspective. Okay. What's number four? Immune system recovery. How do you recover your immune system post-exercise? Well, there's a lot of ways of trying to support it. Generally, things like vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, which is very good for gut health, etc. All of these can actually play quite a vital role in helping with immune system function. And I definitely take something daily to try and help support that because as athletes, we put our immune systems under stress constantly. Okay. Post exercise or post race, I've actually put it in the brochure that I'm sending you. But like I said, first rehydration. So I would take a mineral solution, a hypertonic solution, like the hydrate we've got. I would take a carbohydrate protein. So generally after a session, just to give you an example, I have like a third or a half of a cup of rolled oats. Depending on how long and how hard I've been training, my carbohydrate intake will be based on how hard or how long I've been training. I would put in a serving of protein in there. So to increase my protein intake, I like around 30 to 40 grams of protein after exercise. I put in a teaspoon of peanut butter. I limit my fat intake to around 20%. And then I add some berries in as antioxidants, and that's my meal. That's sort of my go-to meal for post-exercise. Okay, so just as an example. All right, so I'm going to end it there. Thank you for joining. I hope the session was valuable. I've left my details there. You can always touch base with me. I think the email's there, coach@32gr.com. I've also got an AR that's sitting on the 32GR site, so you can also ask the questions. I've got lots of recipes in there. I've actually got a lot of pancake recipes and post-training meals and recovery meals and smoothies. You can actually, and pre-training meals, you can actually go onto the 32GR website. You can go and ask, there's a little AR in the bottom right-hand corner. You can click on it and you can go and ask the AR. I've tried to train it. I've tried to make it like a twin of mine. I'm still scaling it up. It's only on 2.5 million words. I think I speak a lot, so it's got a lot to go. But it's got quite a bit of information. Would I be yeah, sure. I mean, I do presentations to clubs all the time. I've done 6 running clubs in the last 6 weeks, leading into Cape Town Marathon, leading into Soweto Marathon. I do more in-depth sessions to clubs. I've got quite a number of sessions, so they're welcome to contact me. I sometimes go into blood analysis. I go into daily diets and eating. I go into immune system and recovery, and so whatever would be valuable. But absolutely, talking to clubs is something that I do as well, and I'm happy to always try and support and help empower people with the knowledge to make better decisions for themselves. All right, so I'm going to end it there. I'm sure it's a bit longer than we wanted to, but I just wanted to try and get through as much as possible. I hope you guys all have a good rest of your week, and yeah, we'll chat soon. I hope it was a good session.